This is a Civil War map of Vicksburg, Mississippi. By the late summer of 1862, only Vicksburg, Mississippi and Fort Hudson, Louisiana blocked the Union control of the Mississippi River. Vicksburg was the strongest and the most important of the two. It was set on top of high cliffs facing the river, which had a sharp horseshoe turn in front of the town, slowing down river traffic. The river front was protected by a maze of gun batteries. North and south of the city was swamps and bayous, which also protected the city. The city was protected with a ring of some 172 gun emplacements guarding all land approaches. This made Vicksburg almost impregnable. Now this is 3-star Confederate General John C. Pemberton. He was a graduate of West Point, and he resigned his commission to fight for the South. After the surrender of Vicksburg, many questioned his loyalty, being that he was born and raised in Pennsylvania. Of course, this is 2-star General Ulysses S Grant. He was charged with the responsibility of taking control of Vicksburg from the Confederacy. Now, after trying several ideas of how to attack Vicksburg, Grant even tried digging a canal to bypass the big guns there. All of his attempts failed. Finally, Grant ordered Rear Admiral David D. Porter on the night of April 16, 1863, to take his flotilla of ships, led by several ironclad gunboats, and run the gauntlet by Vicksburg's big guns. His idea was to try and get the Union boats south of Vicksburg and then march his army south on the west bank of the river. Then his army could be transported across the river into Mississippi by Admiral Porter's fleet. Now this is a location of one of the Confederate gun locations. You can see the curve in the river there. The reason that river is curved right there, because we're south of the city a little bit, on the south end, is because in 1876 the river itself changed course and no longer went by the main part of Vicksburg. One Union ship was completely sunk and destroyed. The rest were damaged. But Grant's plan worked. If his plan had not have worked, his army would have been in serious trouble, because Porter knew that once past Vicksburg he could not go back and pick Grant up because of the current, which would slow his boats down to make them nothing but sitting ducks. The high cliffs were so high around Vicksburg that a troop landing was impossible. This is one of the gun batteries that actually took part in the battle that night when Porter was trying to get his boats down the river. And you can notice the Green River part here is the old river, and the lighter green is the way the river runs now. The Union really depended on their new ironclads to save the day for them. And this is a picture of one of the ironclads. They're heavily fortified with armor, and they have armor plating. Now this is a closer look at one. This is the Uss Cairo. Now 5 months before Admiral Porter run the gauntlet at Vicksburg. The USS Cairo's commander, Lieutenant Commander Thomas O. Selfridge Jr., on December the 12th, 1862, took the ironclad Cairo and several other vessels up the Yazoo River, and that was located north of Vicksburg. Their destination was to destroy Confederate batteries and to clear the channel, when all of a sudden 2 explosions ripped open the hull of the Cairo. In minutes, the ironclad lay at the bottom of the Yazoo River in 35 feet of water. The Cairo laid there for 150 years. In the 1960s, it was finally located, dug up out of 15 feet of river sand, and brought to this location and restored. And they did it. They didn't completely restore it because they wanted to get an idea of what it looked like from the inside with all the guns. They put new timber exactly where it was supposed to be. And the old timber is still there, and they use the iron metal. The problem with the ironclad was the bottom didn't have iron metal on it, of course, and that's where the mine hit. And the USS Cairo was the first ship to ever be mined. Now, on May the 18th, after Grant's 45,000 men army had crossed the river into Mississippi and fought several battles, including the one at Jackson, he was ready to turn west toward Vicksburg, and the Confederates had retreated into the heavily fortified garrison at Vicksburg, forming a horseshoe defense from the north, east, and south of the city. Now, this is Degorio battlefield. Now, this was named after a Union captain who, of course, was the commander of the battery here. Now, this occurred in June, which was during the siege. The Confederates were on the hill. They had the high ground. And later on, we'll go up there and look back this way. The monument is the Illinois monument you see on the right-hand side of the screen. See all the ditches, and these are things that the Union soldiers was ordered by General Grant to dig as close to the Confederate lines as possible. And they had to dig them closer enough that their heads didn't, deeper enough that their heads didn't stick up because of the sharpshooters. Captain Goyer brought in 22 cannons right here along this line at one time. Now, the Union had the privilege of being able to do that because the Confederates had a 3-mile area that they had to cover, and their guns were scarce because they had to scatter them out so much. But the Union could bring all their guns into 1 or 2 different locations and really pound away. Captain Degorio was killed, by the way, while directing fire from this position here. Now, on the 25th of June, the Union troops had dug so close to the Confederate fortifications at the top of this ridge that they actually planted charges under the wall of the Confederate defenses. And this is what it looked like. Confederates were at the top of the ridge, and you can see the trenches that were dug. And they blowed almost a 40-foot hole in the fortifications, and they poured Union troops through there just as much and as fast as they could go. However, the Confederates had a different barricade set up on the other side. After a 26-hour battle, the Union finally gave up and retreated. On June the 1st, a few days later, they actually did the same thing again, and then they had to retreat again. Just a few hundred yards from that location is the Shirley House here. Now, the Shirley House was occupied by the 45th Illinois Infantry, and that monument there is dedicated to the Illinois. Now, the Shirley House was referred to as a White House by the Union troops. It's the only surviving wartime structure in the park. Now, if you would have been here in June of 1863, here's what you'd have seen if you were standing right here. Because somebody took a picture of the Shirley House during the war. These are all caves and tunnels that the Union soldiers dug to protect them from Confederate fire. And of course, the whole town of Vicksburg was sleeping in caves at night to protect them from Union cannons. Mr. Shirley, James Shirley, owned the house. And they say that Mr. Shirley actually owned 25 slaves, but he was a Union supporter. And that even his son met the Union troops at the door. This is Mr. Shirley. And signed up and began to fight for the Union. Although Mr. Shirley had to leave his home because the 45th made it its headquarters, and the house was heavily damaged during the siege. Now, when General Grant's army reached the Confederate lines on the 18th day of May, he wasted no time in ordering General Sherman to attack. He did so the very next day, on the 19th. He sent his troops up this hill, right to these Confederate soldiers waiting at the top. These were heavily fortified forts that the Confederates had built. And by the way, General Pemberton was actually an engineer, and he designed all these fortifications. He may have not have been as great a battle general, but he was a good engineer. General Sherman sustained substantial losses, close to 1,000 men that first day. 3 days later, General Grant issued orders for an all-out attack against the entire Confederate line. Then again, General Sherman attacked this fort. And again, the Union sustained tremendous losses, more than they could really afford. And that's what caused General Grant to decide to lay siege to Vicksburg instead of trying to fight. He was absolutely losing too many men. Now we're on the Confederate side, looking back towards the Degorio positions. We can see the Shirley House. We can see where the 45th Illinois Infantry was stationed. We can see where the Degorio line was straight ahead. And we can see the ridges where the Union troops were digging ridges trying to get up this hill here, trying to get to the Confederacy. After 46 days, with no supplies reaching the city, ammunition running low, and no hope of being rescued, Pemberton and Grant met to discuss surrender terms. Grant agreed to allow the Southern forces to go home, not wanting to transport them all the way to Virginia, and he felt that they wouldn't fight against the Union anymore, and most of them never did. So on July the 4th, 1863, the siege of Vicksburg was over.